It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. We're looking at World Cup 2026 qualifying in the Asian region. This is round one, the preliminary round. Our 10th pairing is Nepal versus Laos. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 21. I'm Kevin, and today we are at the beginning of a massive set of series looking at World Cup 2026 qualifying. Series 21 will cover 3 rounds of qualifying for the Asian region, or AFC, and this is the last of 10 media casts covering the preliminary round of qualifying. These are the bottom 20 teams in the AFC region playing home and away, the 10 winners advancing to the second round. This is set 10 of 10 then, covering Nepal versus Laos. And we've been wanting to cover the weaker countries in world soccer because they get so little attention. Most media casts focus on the big teams, but these small teams have interesting histories as well. However, some of them never get on the radar, partly because they're often knocked out in early rounds. In addition, they're often hard to separate in the minds of even ardent soccer fans. They just clump into a nebulous group of weak teams finishing at the bottom of the table. Part of the goal here is to make them more distinct then. Throughout, we'll be mentioning teams they beat or teams that usually beat them. We name these teams on purpose so that fans can, little by little, build an impression of how strong each team is relative to those around them. At this point, we usually give some information about our past, present, and future media casts. However, we don't want too much information in our introduction here, so we have made a separate media cast that covers what we've been doing recently and what we plan to cover over the next 9 months. That'll be published around October 15th, 2023, and can also be found at the address that YouTube watchers see on the graphic. And we will also give a link to that in the show notes. Okay, but on with the show here. We will cover the 10th of the 10 preliminary pairings. And in part 1, we'll introduce a little bit about the 2 countries competing, their location and population. Part 2, we will do an overview of each team's history and their recent form. And this series features a deep dive into each team's history in World Cup qualifying. The Asian region is further divided into what we call localities, and they play a big role. So part of part 2 touches on this often neglected aspect of the team's history. And then part 3 will be a comparison of the 2 teams in terms of ranking, head-to-head records, and odds. And we will end with a discussion of their prospects and our prediction for who will emerge from this round. Okay, let's jump right in and take a look at part 1. Let's tell you a little bit about Nepal. So Nepal is a landlocked Himalayan country in South Asia, bordered by the People's Republic of China to the north and by India to the south, east, and west. Nearby countries to Nepal are Bhutan to the west, although a little strip of India separates them, and it touches on Bangladesh to the southwest. Sorry, I should be saying Bhutan to the east and Bangladesh to the southeast there. Okay, that is Nepal, and 31 million people populate Nepal. That makes them 49th in the world and the 20th largest country in Asia. Moving on to Laos. Laos is a country in Southeast Asia. It's landlocked. To its west is southwest is Thailand, and directly west it touches on Myanmar. A little bit of it also touches on South China, and the country to its east is is Vietnam, and to the south, Cambodia. So surrounded by the Southeast Asian countries, which we will see are in its local group. The population of Laos is 7.6 million. It's 103rd largest country in the world and the 33rd largest in Asia. That's out of about 50 countries there. Okay, let's move on to Nepal, the soccer team, and we will begin by an overview of their participation and strength. And Nepal first entered the World Cup in 1986. They missed 2 editions, withdrawing in 1994 and in 2006. Otherwise, they participated consistently. Asian Cup participation is mostly similar. They joined this 2 years earlier in 1984 and missed just 1 edition, not entering the Cup in 1992. Nepal's local group is the South Asian Football Federation, or SAF, where their history is longer and more consistent. They entered that competition, which takes place roughly every 2 years, in 1993 from its start, and have a flawless attendance record. In terms of overall strength, Nepal is a 5th-tier team. Only recently have they passed preliminary rounds to reach the semi-final round of the World Cup, but they're far from reaching the final round. The Asian Cup also seems well beyond their reach, and as a result, they dropped down to the AFC Challenge Cup, a tournament for the weaker teams in the region, from 2006 to 2014. There, they actually proved strong among the 5th and even among the 5th-tier teams, and even challenged some of the 4th-tier teams, though only at the game level. They have kept this up, but not enough to reach the 4th tier, and may be considered a strong 5th-tier team. Let's zoom in a little then on their World Cup. This is just an overview, and we'll do a deep dive a little later. In World Cup qualification, they finished bottom of the table unless there's another 5th-tier team in the group or in the preliminary round. Even at that, they were bested by Macau in 1998, but showed improved strength, beating them home and away 4 years later in 2002. They have registered draws with higher level teams like Jordan and India in early knockout rounds, but they came in the second legs, having been beaten in the first. Beating Chinese Taipei in both legs of the 2022 campaign, having received a bye in the preliminary round, which in itself is a sign of strength, does suggest that they are at the upper range of the 5th tier and currently at a good point in their history, relatively speaking. Okay, now an overview of the Regional Cup. Nepal did not look as weak in Asian Cup competition. In 2004, they did well to pass a preliminary round ahead of Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan. They were generally weak enough, though, to be suitable candidates for the AFC Challenge Cup, the tournament in lieu of the Asian Cup for the weaker teams. They reached the semi-finals in the first edition in 2006, beating India 3-0 along the way. They continue to earn some good game level results over the next 4 editions, tying Palestine twice, for example, but they were knocked out at the group stage twice and failed to qualify twice. In 2019, they and all other teams returned to the Asian Cup for a newly formatted tournament. They took a very circuitous route to reach the final round, the 3rd round of 3. But since we're talking about 2019, we'll be covering that in the recent history section. So let's just move on to the local cup here. Nepal is also members of the South Asian Football Federation, as we said. This is a very weak regional group with India, a 4th tier team, as the best team in the region, in the locality. Here, Nepal shows themselves at the stronger end of the fifth tier. They passed the group stage of the tournament about half the time, and they took third place in the first edition in 1993 and second place in the 2021 edition. Okay, moving on to the deep dive then, World Cup finals. In 1986, they had their first World Cup campaign, and there they earned a point, tying Malaysia. They finished bottom of the three-team group, though, but kept the scorelines respectable, losing only 2-0 at home to South Korea in their tournament opener. They met the same two teams in 1990, that is South Korea and Malaysia, along with Singapore for that tournament. Here they lost all games and actually did suffer some heavier margins. In 1994, they withdrew from the tournament. They were drawn into a group with Malaysia for the third time, along with Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Macau, but withdrew from the group. But they opened the 1998 campaign with a home draw, tying Macau. They lost all other games and were in fact bested by the weak Macau, finishing in fourth place in the group behind them. 2002 showed some improvement, though, as they beat Macau both home and away to finish in third place ahead of them. Nepal withdrew from the 2006 World Cup, but returned in 2010 to an impossible pairing with Oman, the 2010 first stage, kind of notorious for that, a really wide field which paired the weak teams with teams they had no chance of beating. They did well to keep the scoreline against Oman as respectable as they did, losing 2-0 in both legs. They had a similar pairing in 2014, but that came after winning a preliminary round over East Timor. So in round two, they lost 9-0 to Jordan, but they did tie in the second leg. A bit of a Pyrrhic victory there, but a good mark on their record, challenging a second to third tier team there. 2018 saw them paired in the preliminary round with India, who proved too strong. Here too, they tied in the second leg after losing in the first. In 2022, they questionably received a bye, and we're going to cover this in recent campaigns, but I'll talk about the byes now. They received a bye in the preliminary round, so that means they weren't ranked as one of the bottom 12 teams in the region. 2026 expanded the preliminary round to the bottom 20 teams, and again, like in 2010, there was a danger of being paired with a team well beyond them. However, they were a bit lucky in being paired with Laos here. Okay, let us move on to the recent history, and that begins with the 2019 Asian Cup, and be prepared for a bit of a circuitous route here. I never know how to say that word. A complicated route. Okay, so the Asian Cup 2019 began with the first two rounds of World Cup 2018 qualifying, and so we saw that they were bested by India in the preliminary round, and so that actually sent them directly to the Solidarity Cup. The Solidarity Cup is a tournament, kind of a revision of the Challenge Cup, but now it's designed for basically teams that don't make it to the final round of Asian Cup qualifying. So it's a good tournament for the weak teams, because really the weakest teams will be there. And in 2016, and don't be confused by that, remember this is 2018 World Cup qualifying and the first round. So the preliminaries actually took place in 2015, and then this tournament for those knocked out early in 2016. Oh, okay. So in the group stage, they began poorly, actually, with a tie against the very weak East Timor, but won over Brunei to finish first in the group stage. They went on to the semi-final and had a great game with Laos, who they meet here. That was 1-1 after regulation time. 2-2 after extra time, and then they won 3-0 on penalties. So that sets up a good contest here when they meet again. In the final, they beat Macau 1-0. The team that we saw they have a bit of history with, and a bit of a lucky thing at the end there. It's not the case that winners of the Solidarity Cup make it back into qualifying. That's not one of the rules, but it just so happened in this cup that two teams had dropped out of the final round of Asian Cup qualifying. So the AFC decided to replace those two teams with the two teams in the final here. So Nepal and Macau suddenly and unexpectedly found themselves back in Asian Cup qualifying for 2019. And they didn't do badly there either. They got a tie over Yemen and over the Philippines. Those are basically fourth-tier teams now, and nevertheless finished last in the group. But fairly competitive there. No loss was bigger than a 3-goal margin. So not a bad showing for Nepal there. Okay, the next tournament is the 2021 SAF Cup, so their local cup, and there were 5 teams in the group stage. This is a very weak locality, as you'll see by the teams. They did actually beat Maldives, which is one of the stronger teams in the region, and in their second game beat Sri Lanka. As expected, they lost to India, and then they tied Bangladesh. All of that added up to a second place finish out of the 5 teams. And then those 2 teams went on to play each other in the final. There, India won that game 3-0. So a very good second place finish, even if it is amongst fairly weak opposition there. By the way, Maldives was a surprise win and the host of the tournament, so that was a particularly good result there. World Cup 2022 saw them receive a bye in the round 1, meaning that they were not one of the 12 weakest teams in the region. So they went directly to the semi-final round, where they beat Chinese Taipei in both legs to finish in 4th place above them, but were no match for Australia, Kuwait, and Jordan. Next, we go back to the South Asian Football Federation's local cup, the 2023 edition, and Kuwait was an invited guest to that tournament to try to raise the level a little bit, and Kuwait beat them in the opener 3-1, and they also lost to India. So it was just a 1-0 win over Pakistan, that tournament, in a decidedly difficult group as far as it goes. Finally, we look at Asian Cup 2023 qualification, and that is actually the first 2 rounds of World Cup 2022 qualification. So we saw they received a bye in the first round and beat Chinese Taipei twice to finish ahead of them. So they actually received automatic passage to the 3rd round with that 4th place finish. And in the 3rd round were once again kind of out of their league amongst stronger teams. So they lost to Jordan, Kuwait, and actually very heavily to Indonesia to finish last in the group. Okay, that brings us to the end of Nepal. And now we turn our attention to Laos and begin with an overview of their participation and strength. So Laos first entered World Cup competition in 2002 and participated every time except for 2010, which they did not enter. Participation in the Asian Cup has been more patchy. They entered that in 2000, but they missed 3 tournaments from 2006 to 2010 for various reasons. Laos's local group is the AFF, the ASEAN Football Federation, and ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian nations. So Southeast Asia, as we saw in the in part one. The ASEAN Cup started in 1996 and it runs every 2 years, and Laos has been flawless in their participation there, even in 2010 when they missed the World and Asian Cups. In terms of overall strength, Laos is also a fifth-tier team, and they have proven competitive with teams of that level and have also taken the odd point from fourth-tier teams, although that's quite rare. In their campaigns, they pass about half of the preliminary rounds if there is one, but if they advance beyond the first stage of a competition, they invariably finish last in a group stage, doing well to get a single draw or to keep the scorelines respectable. In World Cup play, Laos has had some success in their qualification runs. The true definition of a fifth-tier team is that they may take the odd point off other fifth-tier teams or the odd fourth-tier teams, but generally don't do well at the campaign level. And I'll just say at this point that Laos has proven a strong fifth-tier team. So they have passed the preliminary round a couple of times, and even if they find themselves in a group, have managed to take a couple of points or at least prove competitive. But I think all of this is going to be covered in the deep dive, and at the risk of being repetitive, I'm just going to move on and leave it to the deep dive to cover the details. We'll move on to the Regional Cup overview. And I would say Asian Cup, except for weak teams, in 2006, they dropped down to the Challenge Cup. Early Asian Cup campaigns did group them with teams that they could challenge, though. They made the best of it, with winning one game in each campaign to finish out of last place in the 2000 and 2004 campaigns. And it may be that they were considered too strong for the Challenge Cup. That tournament is an alternative tournament for teams too weak to compete in the Asian Cup. So they played the Challenge Cup in lieu. But Laos was not allowed to enter in 2006. Actually, they were initially accepted, but then they were replaced. So I'm guessing the reason was that they were considered too strong. However, you know, a 4-0 loss to Myanmar in the 2000 Asian campaign should have indicated that they were an appropriate candidate for this cup. Anyway, they became eligible for the 2008 edition. However, they withdrew from that and from the 2010 editions. They did enter in 2012 as if to prove they were a weak team. They lost 5-2 to Chinese Taipei in the opening game of preliminary qualification. They tied in the second and home leg, but did not qualify for the 2012 version. But here we see a bit of improvement. In 2014, they did qualify, thanks in part to a 4-2 win over Chinese Taipei in qualifying, so getting revenge on them. They did finish last in the group stage there and were knocked out at that stage. In 2019, they and all teams returned to a newly formatted Asian Cup. In both cases, they were knocked out early and sent to the Solidarity Cup, which we'll talk about actually because this is part of recent tournaments. So actually, let's leave it directly for that and go to the local cup overview here. So their local competition is the ASEAN Cup, Southeast Asian countries, and it really does provide a better view of them. The strongest teams in the Southeast Asian locality are third-tier teams, but there are several fifth-tier teams among whom Laos can compete at their own level. They have qualified for all but the 2016 edition. I think for the most part, 8 of the 10 teams qualify, so it's not that hard to make it to the competition. But that is evidence in itself that they're among the stronger of the fifth-tier teams. They've also taken points from the top teams in the region, Thailand and Indonesia, although that's quite rare. In recent years, Philippines and Cambodia, teams that they used to beat in the past, seem to have grown stronger than them. Okay, let's go to the deep dive for the World Cup. So Laos had an ugly introduction to the World Cup in 2002, losing their first 4 games by heavy margins, including 2 double-digit losses to Oman and Syria. However, in the last 2 games, they beat and tied Philippines to finish ahead of them, despite a far worse goals record. In 2006, they were bested by Sri Lanka in a preliminary round. However, they were selected from among others as the lucky loser, a team that lost in the preliminary round, to replace a team in the semi-final round which had withdrawn. So they did actually play in the group stage semi-final round there. They lost all games there, but there were no double-digit losses, even though Iran was a even stronger team than those to whom they suffered those results. And their home game with Jordan was quite competitive, a 3-2 loss. So the evidence there of slight improvement in their World Cup play. However, they did not enter in 2010. 2014, though, was a pretty dramatic preliminary round against Cambodia. After losing 4-2 away in the opening leg, they won by the same unlikely score at home. And the matter went to extra time, where Laos scored twice and won. That took them to the second round, where they lost to China by to China by a 5-goal margin in both legs, although they did score goals in both of those games, even though that's a bit of a cold comfort. In a ridiculously inaccurate FIFA ranking, they were not one of the 12 teams required to play the preliminary round in 2018, though much stronger teams like Indonesia were. So they were in the semi-final round automatically, and they opened that well with a draw against Myanmar. However, they lost all others except for the last game, where they were awarded a 3-0 win over Kuwait, who had been disqualified. In 2022, they were among the 12 weakest teams to undergo the preliminary round, and we will take a look at that in recent history coming up shortly. But we begin recent history with the Asian Cup in 2019, and that is actually the same 2 rounds as the 2018 World Cup, where we saw that Laos had questionably received a bye from the preliminary round and proceeded directly to the semi-final round, where they opened with a draw against Myanmar and then got 3 free points at the end, with Kuwait having been disqualified. So they finished with 4 points there, but still at the bottom of the table, and that finish was not enough to get them through to the 3rd round. But we've seen that Asia offers a lot of opportunities for the weaker teams, so they had not 1 but 2 playoff rounds for Laos to try to make it to the final round. So the first was a playoff against India, where they lost both games, and then they had a playoff with Maldives, where they lost 4-0 in the first leg, and a tie in the second leg didn't give them any help. So teams that don't make it to the final round are sent to the Solidarity Cup, keeping in mind that these preliminary games are in 2015. The Solidarity Cup is in 2016, even though it's technically part of 2019 Asian Cup qualifying. In that group stage, they did quite well at this lower level. They beat Sri Lanka and Mongolia, although they suffered a heavy loss to Macau. Both Macau and them advanced to a final round. And we talked about their excellent game with Nepal, where they tied 1-1 in regulation time, 2-2 in extra time, and then lost on penalties. And so they were sent to a third place match, which they won over Brunei to finish third in the tournament. Okay, and the next tournament was the local cup, the ASEAN Cup in 2020, and there they lost all games to Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and even a fairly heavy loss to Cambodia, 3-0 there. So last in the group stage there. World Cup 2022 saw them knocked out in qualifying, in the preliminary round. So they lost the first game at home to Bangladesh, 1-0, and then in Bangladesh managed a scoreless tie, but that wasn't enough, and Bangladesh advanced to the next round. We'll come back to this in Asian Cup 2023 qualifying. Meanwhile, their next tournament is in the local cup, and there was a bit of a qualifying round there, and they received a bye in that round. I think only two teams, the two weakest teams, participate in the preliminary round. So maybe it's saying something that they're not among the two weakest teams, but they are pretty weak, because in the next round they suffered heavy losses to Vietnam and Malaysia, and they also lost to Singapore, and they only managed to tie with Myanmar, which is not bad because Myanmar is a stronger team. Both of them finished at the bottom of the table with 1 point, but Laos finished behind Myanmar on goal difference in that group. All right, and we said we would return to the 2022 World Cup preliminary round, because it also served as the first round in Asian Cup 2023 qualifying. And we saw that they were bested by Bangladesh there. And we've also seen that if you are knocked out in the preliminary round of an Asian Cup, you go to the Solidarity Cup. So they would have gone to the Solidarity Cup, except it was in 2020 and it was cancelled due to COVID. So no Solidarity Cup there. Their tournament, both World Cup and Asian Cup, ended with that preliminary exit at the hands of Bangladesh. Okay, that's the end of Laos, and we move on to our analysis of this preliminary pairing. Nepal is the pot 1 team, and Laos is the pot 2 team. The bottom 20 teams were divided into 10 and 10. So Nepal just at the bottom there, ranked 35th in Asia, and Laos towards the middle of the pot 2, ranked 40 in Asia. Let's look at the FIFA rankings. They're a little different than that above, because these are more recent ones that I'm going to give you. So Nepal is the same, actually, 175th in FIFA rankings, whereas Laos has dropped down a point to 188th. So just 13 points between them there. That range is bigger in ELO rankings, which we trust a little bit more. We find them more sensible. Nepal is ranked 194th there, and Laos well behind, 32 places behind, 226th. I think that's a little bit harsh, given that they do get some results, but maybe not so much in recent times. Okay, we usually do a little bit on the last 10 years in their rankings. So basically, Nepal has been getting a little bit better. They started between 180 and 190, and they moved actually all the way up to about 162 before dropping back down to 175. But we did notice actually the trend of improvement in their history. I don't particularly see a recent weakening of that, but maybe slightly. No, Laos, on the other hand, oh, I should just say that it's roughly the same in ELO, although ELO goes up and down less. So they started at about 195 10 years ago, dropped down to about 202, and have now risen up to 194. So, yeah, my impression is more like the ELO rankings, where they have actually gotten a bit better in recent times. Laos was actually much stronger than Nepal for about 10 years ago, all the way up to 152 in December 2013. But they've kind of dropped steadily from that time down to 188 in FIFA rankings. It's the same pattern in the ELO rankings, just not as dramatic. They almost broke the 200 barrier about 10 years ago, actually in 200th place in ELO rankings, but then kind of dropped steadily down to where they are now, which is 226th. So Laos kind of getting weaker, and I feel Nepal kind of getting a bit stronger. Let's look at their head-to-head record. Actually, they've only played once. That was in the 2016 Solidarity Cup, that excellent game we saw, which was hard-fought until the end when Nepal won on penalties. But that's a good sign for an exciting matchup here, if it's anything like that. In terms of odds, we couldn't get odds for over the two legs, so we would like to see what the professional odds makers are predicting for that round. Not that we're encouraging gambling, because you will probably come out behind. We only have the odds for Nepal at home, which is 71% chance of winning, and 15% chance for Laos. And maybe I'll begin the discussion with that. I do think Nepal will be the stronger team overall, and certainly at home. I agree with their much higher odds at home. But unlike some of the other matches we've looked at, I think Laos would maybe have about a 50% chance of winning or taking points at home. So I think it is quite possible. Over the two games, though, I would give Nepal the edge, maybe about 65-35 or 60-40. But overall, I think Nepal has more advantages. They, as we saw, have a bit of momentum, or not negative momentum like Laos do. I think Nepal actually is getting a bit stronger, and Laos getting a bit weaker. And Nepal already is a strong fifth-tier team, whereas Laos is sometimes a strong fifth-tier team, but on the whole, maybe more in the middle of the fifth tier. And we saw that Nepal comes from pot one here as well. So I don't think it'll be as close a battle as in the 2016 Solidarity Cup there. But it is one of the closer preliminary round matchups. So I'm excited to see how this one turns out. There's certainly room for an upset here, which is not the case in some of the preliminary round matchups. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of set 10, Nepal versus Laos, and actually to the end of part one of series 21 on the preliminary round of Asian Cup qualifying. So part two actually begins in November, but we will be previewing part two later than that. We like to let a couple of games go in these group matches, so we can kind of see how things are coming along. So we won't be publishing that until February or March 2024. However, in between that is the Asian Cup in January 2024, even though it's titled the Asian Cup 2023. And we'll be publishing our preview for that. We'll be doing the groups and teams first and a short version. We've already recorded those. And we'll also be doing a player version for the 24 teams of the each of the 24 teams of the Asian Cup. So keep an eye out for the groups and teams ones, pretty much in mid-October here, and the players one probably in early to mid-November. All right, we hopefully will see you for that. We would like to thank Pixabay and Amaxi for the use of the music in this series titled Caledon or Caledon Flute Key.